I need to break down the sanitized fairy story that the mainstream media is feeding you, so pay close attention to what I have to say. It was not your typical royal press conference that took place early on May 31, 2026. It was also not a step in the direction of institutional modernization. It was unquestionably the most brutal, legally sound, and surgically accurate beheading of a sitting royal operational power in contemporary history. To help you understand the scope of the choreography required, allow me to establish the scene. It is precisely 9:12 a.m. London time. 50 international news crews have already set up shop outside Buckingham Palace's enormous, decaying iron gates. Expecting a typical update on royal charitable endeavours, their lenses trained on the gravel driveway, the typical hum of reporters spouting their talking points fills the air. The visual story suddenly breaks apart. The Princess of Wales, Catherine, steps out of her lone car. She is by herself. No sovereign confirmation from King Charles. There is no dynastic reinforcement from Prince William. There were no aides, no orders, and no expansive entourage to accompany her. With a chillingly deliberate solitude, it was just Catherine moving toward the bank of microphones. On the surface, her statement appears to be a benign dedication to financial transparency and a masterclass in progressive public relations. She looks straight into the cameras and declares that the crown is only valuable when it embodies complete transparency. She also declares that a thorough independent forensic audit of the entire royal charitable system will begin at midnight. She goes on to say that any monies that are not properly documented will be frozen right away, and she ends with a statement that sounds like lyrical institutional branding. They do not protect mistakes in the dark, they expose them to the light. This story was embraced by the international media, which produced headlines about a modernized monarchy boldly entering a new period of economic discipline. However, I require you to remove the public relations facade and examine the mechanical reality of what was truly taking place at that very moment. You would see that Catherine was not making a courteous announcement if you were familiar with the legal structure of the royal household. A hostile internal protocol was being formally initiated by her. All discretionary spending inside the royal ecology was legally put on hold as soon as she said those words on worldwide television. Furthermore, that freeze was not a general administrative halt. It was a laser-guided weapon that was specifically targeted at the banking system that Queen Camilla has been stealthily and painstakingly using for decades. Catherine was not addressing the British people when she stated that mistakes are not protected in the dark. She was giving one individual a clear, unquestionable ultimatum, and the staging is what makes the execution so brilliant. Catherine was announcing a horrifying new truth to the palace's upper echelons by entering that courtyard by herself without the king or the heir apparent. In the Windsor ensemble, she wasn't playing a supporting role. She was projecting complete autonomy and self-governance. She was letting every rival, every private secretary, and every courtier know that she no longer needed permission to overthrow the established order. The broadcast in London distracted the world, but exactly 70 miles away, in the peaceful, well-kept seclusion of Wiltshire, something far more dangerous and momentous was taking place. The Ray Mill estate was Queen Camilla's private haven. The entire facility was under a complete operational lockdown by 11:00 the same morning, according to high-level security sources. All the gates were locked. No employees were allowed on the property. All traditional lines of contact were suddenly cut off. The estate was essentially cut off from the outside world. Then one lone car crept up the gravel driveway, shattering the quiet of that lockdown. The traveller who emerged was not a relative looking to have a private discussion. A top legal advisor for Prince William's private office was carrying a very secure briefcase that contained a document that palace insiders are now discreetly referring to as the silent contract. I want you to understand how serious this paperwork is. This was not a diplomatic letter advocating for a modest decrease in royal responsibilities. There was no room for negotiation in this harsh, legally obligatory surrender document. The severity of the terms outlined in that contract was quite astounding. Queen Camilla would forever abandon her fundamental right to communicate in any official or public role without express prior authorization if she signed those pages. Every single public remark she would try to make after that day, all written correspondence carrying her name, philanthropic endeavors, and brief encounters with the media would have to go straight through Catherine's communications system for forensic examination and approval. The vast, complex personal network Camilla had built from the ground up over the course of 30 arduous years, the discreet media-backed channels, the loyalist charitable patronage structures, and the tactical social connections that protected her inside the aristocracy. The moment her pen touched that page, everything would instantaneously evaporate. You may be pondering this while you sit there, wondering why in the world she would ever give in. She is referred to as Queen Consort. In the immediate sovereign order, she is technically superior than the Princess of Wales. What possible power could William and Catherine have to compel a reigning monarch to give up her independence and abide by a gag order? The answer to that inquiry is $12,450,000, a devastatingly accurate and exceedingly specific figure. The preliminary forensic accountants discovered more than just administrative mistakes when they started delving deeply into the complex royal ledgers weeks earlier. They discovered a sophisticated covert financial operation that had been operating for years within the Duchy of Cornwall's charitable arm. This extraction's mechanics were outstanding in their banality. For what seemed to be routine daily operating expenses, modest, inconspicuous administrative grants would be applied for and granted. These requests appeared entirely normal on paper and were undetectable to regular auditors. However, those particular localized payments were routinely intercepted and diverted into a secondary, highly hidden intermediary trust rather than going to their original public beneficiaries. The money was then discreetly distributed from that shadowy holding account to a vast unlisted network of independent businesses and fictitious charities, all of which were solely connected to Camilla's personal network of patrons. The accountants discovered a closed-loop system. Her aggressive extension of her own sphere of influence, her defensive public relations alliances, and her private networking operations were all being funded by the constant embezzlement of institutional resources. All of them are functioning entirely outside the purview of regular palace supervision. The documentation that resulted from decoding, cross-referencing, and verifying the digital paper trail was structurally sound. And when William's legal assassin entered the Ray Mill mansion, he had that precise paperwork in that locked folder. There was no rising voice when the ultimatum was presented to Camilla that morning. It was a chilly binary in mathematics. Option 1, she signs the silent contract, keeps the ceremonial title of Queen Consort, but immediately loses all real operational authority. In the second option, she declines to sign and observes in real time as the internal audit is promptly escalated and turned over to external government regulatory authorities. The intentional misappropriation of charitable trust monies is not seen as a private family dispute or a simple reputational disgrace under the stringent guidelines of the United Kingdom Charities Act of 2011. It is categorized as a serious criminal offense. William was ready to give the unreacted financial information to statutory investigators immediately if Camilla had refused to comply, which would have unavoidably led to the records being unsealed for the ravenous international press. Every concealed transaction history, every covert routing number, and every private company that received those misdirected funds, knowingly or unknowingly, would be prominently shown on the front page of every newspaper on the planet. The palace would have been legally and institutionally required to cut all connections with her, completely distancing itself from her and depriving her of any sovereign immunity to shield her from the ensuing legal annihilation. The ensuing public inquiry would have been disastrous, an extinction-level event for her public life. However, there was an additional dimension to this operation, a ticking clock that made the ambush's execution crucial. The Privy Council was legally required to meet in a planned session at precisely 1:45 that same afternoon in order to formally review, approve, and seal the royal household's operating budget for the next fiscal year. I need you to comprehend the meeting's jurisdictional weight. The budget becomes a permanent, unchangeable state record as soon as the council signs it. There is a profound change in the overall legal dynamic. The monarchy would no longer be handling a quiet internal family issue if Prince William had paused and let that 145 meeting go forward while a $12 million anomaly remained unaddressed in the ledgers. The institution of the Crown itself would become legally involved and complicit in an ongoing financial cover-up if it formally approved a compromised and false financial ledger. There was an oppressively little window of opportunity for action. It was necessary to carry out the confrontation at Ray Mill that same morning. It has to take place prior to 1:45. Before the council met and the ledger was recorded in history, it had to be completed. And William did just that. Negotiations were not conducted by the legal advisor. Without waiting to hear her answer, he turned on his heel, set the binding documents on the polished wooden table, and left. With only a few agonizing hours to make the most important and terrible decision of her life, Queen Camilla was left all alone in the oppressive silence of the wheelchair estate. It is also blatantly clear which course she took if you watch how the royal communications apparatus acted later that afternoon. The official royal bulletin was released at precisely 3:30 that afternoon. It was only 4 carefully constructed lines, unnervingly short for a statement of this size. The crucial statement said that the Queen Consort would be withdrawing from all official public activities for the foreseeable future due to unexpected and sudden health issues that necessitated a prolonged time of rest. You are fully aware of the meaning of the unique terminology used in royal media strategy if you have taken the time to examine it. In the entire crisis management playbook, the term sudden health complications is the hardest to penetrate. No matter how hostile, the British media cannot retaliate against a medical announcement without immediately coming across as ruthlessly targeting an elderly woman who is in danger. When someone is deemed ill, the general people naturally does not require strict deadlines or hard evidence. That particular conceptualization has no accountability mechanism at all. Additionally, it gives investigative follow-up queries no oxygen. When it is deployed, the enormous, hefty iron door locks and crashes shut. And I can assure you that it was not written by Camilla's folks, therefore whoever wrote that exact remark was fully aware of the psychological warfare they were wagging. Hours earlier, her team's authority had already been taken away. However, this raises an issue that you really need to consider and analyses. Why didn't William and Catherine advocate for the whole revocation of her title if the forensic financial evidence was as solid and conclusive as the confidential leaks coming from palace sources? Why let her continue to hold the unattainable title of Queen Consort, even if it's just for ceremonial purposes? While completely dismantling the equipment underneath the sparkling label, why even bother safeguarding it? King Charles is intimately related to the solution to that calculus. To be honest, the institutional strategy makes perfect brutal logic when you examine it. His reign would be completely destroyed by a major widely reported removal of the Queen Consort's title, especially if it was sparked by a catastrophic financial scandal involving the systematic misappropriation of charitable funds directly linked to his own sovereign family. It would be more than simply a political catastrophe. It would be extremely embarrassing for me personally. A few shrewd press releases won't change the worldwide spectacle of a sitting anointed monarch whose own wife was discovered surreptitiously transferring millions of dollars from his own charitable trusts into a private shadow network. It is precisely the kind of disastrous historical event that, in the most horrifying way possible, forever defines a legacy. Therefore, the institution cleverly protects Charles from that catastrophic result by coercing Camilla into the silent contract, allowing her to keep the title on paper while methodically removing every last bit of real operational power from behind the curtain. The public is given the impression that a kind monarch is handling a challenging medical situation in a private family with calm, stoic dignity. They purposefully fail to see the whole picture. Furthermore, the enormous disparity between the harsh operational reality and the contrived public picture is completely deliberate. It is very astounding to consider what Queen Camilla's day-to-day activities actually include. The title is still hers. She will continue to be wheeled out to attend state banquets. She will continue to wear priceless antique jewelry. Additionally, she will continue to wave from the armored windows of state vehicles while flashing a practice smile for the cameras. However, Catherine's communications division will have carefully pre-approved, sanitized, and scripted every word she says in public. The Williams tactical team will have personally chosen each and every engagement that she is allowed to attend. The central authority must now provide advance, recorded clearance for any guest wishing to enter her home. Now, all of her private correspondence, emails, and secure messages are funneled through closely watched internal palace servers under constant, unwavering supervision from Catherine's intelligence team. All phone conversations are recorded. Every physical action is monitored and recorded. She is completely contained behind what one deeply ingrained source described as a glass cage under constant surveillance. For the sake of the general public, the sparkling visual display of absolute power is perfectly preserved. However, the tangible mechanisms of that authority have been surgically and totally removed. 30 years of meticulously crafted social and political power have been brutally reduced to a two-dimensional, flat ceremonial image that is now fully managed by someone else. I genuinely cannot imagine a more complete and catastrophic turn of events. There was one obvious, unavoidable missing during the entire day that reveals more about the shifting tectonic plates of the royal family than nearly any other aspect, even as all of this extraordinary internal conflict was coming to an end. There was no sign of King Charles. He didn't make a follow-up remark supporting Camilla's morality. He did not step in to stop the hastily delivered legal ultimatum to the Ray Mill estate. He seldom appeared in public to convey steadiness. No part of the seismic shift taking place beneath his own house was acknowledged by him. That complete radio stillness was startling for a man who physically wears the hefty crown of imperial authority. He was fully informed of the financial audit's scathing results well before any of these maneuvers were carried out, according to deep within sources. He was fully aware of the dangerous substance that was within that locked folder, and he also had a basic awareness of the harsh realities of his job. He was aware that William would be ready to set off the bomb if he tried to use his supreme sovereign power to shield his wife from the repercussions of her behavior, making the disastrous financial disparities public knowledge. Charles was stuck in an impossible dilemma, effectively paralyzed. He had two options. He could step down or defend the woman he had dedicated his life to defending and run the danger of starting a controversy that would destroy his reputation as the head of the historic organization. The institution was his choice. He prioritized the crown's preservation over individual safety, while his own son and daughter-in-law methodically and brutally demolished every single instrument of control his wife had established. He sat silently in the secluded shadows of his own rooms for the entire historic day. That is not a small historical detail. That is the harsh, indisputable picture of a king who has lost the real practical power in his own family. And I can assure you that everyone working inside those royal walls is aware of the implications of that enormous change in power over the course of the next years. At around 5 o'clock that evening, when long shadows were being cast over London's expansive architecture by the setting sun, there was one more extremely symbolic element that only those who were paying close attention were able to notice. On the roof of Kensington Palace, the Princess of Wales abruptly and purposefully increased her personal standard. A piece of cloth caught in the evening breeze probably went unnoticed by the majority of common people strolling through the nearby gardens. Raising a standard, however, is never a casual or unintentional act in the ancient, carefully defined language of royal protocol. Standards convey geographical control, dominant authority, and physical presence. Raising that particular flag at the conclusion of that particular bloodless coup was an intentional, indisputable punctuation point on all that had just been carried out in silence. For 15 long years, Catherine has been firmly ingrained in this family structure. As an outsider, she entered the fray and was subjected to intense internal conflict and a staggering level of public scrutiny. Over the course of the 15-year incubation period, I learned exactly how the ancient institution actually functions behind its highly polished, misleading surface. I never once broke character in public and never ever gave the frenzied press a legitimate issue to monetize. She discovered the precise location of the true leverage. She discovered which administrative procedures are genuinely important and which are merely ornate theatrical devices used to divert attention from the general population. All of that passive observation culminated in what transpired on May 31st. There was no spectacular yelling altercation. The public outcry was not caused by a dirty tabloid. The public will likely never fully understand the smooth, completely undetectable and unquestionable transfer of total operational control. The public is being offered the official, very sanitized narrative that the monarchy is stable, totally cohesive, and graciously handling a personal health issue inside the family behind closed doors. And there is nothing that can be seen to refute that made-up narrative, therefore it holds up flawlessly. There are no public arguments to analyses, no fingerprints on the